Hello Gates. At 85 years old, Cliff Richard finally said the words he had spent a lifetime holding back. It happened during a quiet interview, the kind where the lights are soft and the world feels far away. When George Harrison's name came up, Cliff paused, swallowed, and whispered, "There was something about George the First never said publicly, not until now." His voice trembled, and suddenly, the decades of silence felt heavier than ever. Why did he wait so long? And what truth had lived untouched in the shadows of their friendship? Long before the spotlight and the fame, Cliff Richard was Harry Roger Webb, a boy born in Lucknow, India, in 1940. He grew up in the heat of a country on the edge of independence, unaware that destiny was quietly shaping the young child who would one day change British music. When his family returned to England in 1948, they found themselves in a nation still recovering from war. Money was scarce, streets were grey, and dreams felt like luxuries. But even in the modest homes of Cheshunt, Hertfordshire, Cliff held on to something that kept him alive, music. He fell in love with American rock and roll, clinging to the voices of Elvis Presley and Little Richard as if they were lifelines. Alone in his room, he practiced vocal runs, studied guitar chords, and imagined a world where the music he adored could one day come from him. Those childhood struggles carved out the very resilience that later made him a legend. He didn't know it yet, but he was standing at the very edge of a revolution. By the late 1950s, that revolution arrived. Cliff Richard burst into the music scene with Move It, a raw, electric track that critics now credit as the first genuine British rock and roll song. Overnight, Cliff became the UK's answer to Elvis. With the Drifters, later renamed the Shadows, he created a sound so defining, so sharp, that it paved the way for every British rock band that followed. Living Doll, Please Don't Tease. The young ones, these weren't just hits, they were anthems of a generation hungry for identity. He became a teenage idol. A heartthrob. A star, but behind the screaming crowds and flashing cameras, something else was forming, a connection that no one expected. A quiet, gentle musician from Liverpool named George Harrison crossed paths with Cliff just as the Beatles were starting their climb. Cliff was already a superstar. George was still shy, soft-spoken, almost hesitant. Their first meeting wasn't glamorous at all, a backstage corner in Liverpool, a brief handshake, a nervous smile. Yet Cliff never forgot the look in George's eyes, thoughtful, distant, searching. He had no idea that everything was about to change. As years passed, their friendship grew not from fame, but from something deeper. Music had shaped them, but spirituality connected them. Cliff's Christian faith grounded him, giving him a compass in the storm of fame. George, meanwhile, was embracing Eastern philosophy and meditation, drawn to the inner peace he could never quite find in the Beatlemania whirlwind. They discussed God quietly, almost timidly at first. One from a church pew, the other from ancient Hindu teachings. But both were searching for the same thing, truth. We were two different souls walking toward the same light, Cliff recalled. He once told me, all paths lead to the same place if your heart is right. And I believed him. But fame is rarely gentle. As the Beatles skyrocketed, George became one of the most influential musicians in the world. Cliff, meanwhile, reinvented himself, shifting from rock rebel to pop gentleman, then to gospel singer, all while trying to hold on to his own identity. Their worlds drifted apart, but the bond never disappeared. Still, behind the friendship, the truth was far darker. Cliff remembers one evening in particular, a charity event where George quietly picked up a sitar and began to play. The room faded away. It was raw emotion, not performance. Cliff watched, knowing George wasn't entertaining anyone, he was expressing something he couldn't say out loud. That was when Cliff sensed the burden George carried. The pressure. The expectations. The desperate search for peace. What came next, no one expected. As George pulled away from the spotlight, choosing gardens over stages, Cliff found himself burying questions he was too afraid to ask. He admired George's courage, the ability to walk away, to reclaim his life. Cliff never managed that. I loved performing too much, he later admitted. Maybe too much. It was the beginning of a quiet heartbreak neither of them spoke about. Then came November 29, 2001, the day George Harrison passed away. When Cliff heard the news, the grief hit him like a sudden winter. George wasn't someone he saw often, but the spiritual thread between them had never broken. And now, it never could be repaired. I thought of all the things I never said, Cliff confessed. All the moments I kept in my heart, assuming there'd be more time. It was his rock bottom. The moment he realized silence can be its own kind of regret, but fate wasn't done with him yet. In his later years, Cliff found himself returning to George's music, not the hits, but the quiet, spiritual songs. He listened differently now, hearing the longing, the questions, the gentle ache George had carried. Slowly, the regrets softened. Cliff began speaking more openly about George's influence, how he had shaped his own journey toward peace and purpose. And this led to the confession he finally shared at 85. Cliff revealed the truth he had never spoken, that George Harrison changed him not through fame, but through humility, stillness, and spirit. I knew the Beatle, Cliff said softly, but I also knew the man who simply wanted to make sense of life. And I never told him how much that meant to me. It wasn't scandal. It wasn't drama. It was something far more human, the kind of truth only age allows you to say out loud. Today, as Cliff reflects on his extraordinary journey, he holds George Harrison not as a legend, but as a gentle soul who walked alongside him for a season. Their bond wasn't loud or public. It was quiet, spiritual, almost sacred. A reminder of how fame brings people together and how time eventually pulls them apart, but through the memories, the music, and the honesty that only comes at the twilight of life, Cliff Richard has finally made peace with what he left unsaid.